So we're discussing Persepolis, that is the 2007 animated film directed by Marjane Satrapi and Vincent Paronnaud. This is a film that was even France's official entry into the Oscars in 2007. So it's a really interesting film. It's based on Marjane Satrapi's graphic novel come memoir called Persepolis, and so it looks at a coming of age narrative. All right, so we're looking at the coming of age narrative of Marjane Satrapi, but we're also simultaneously looking at the coming of age of modern day Iran. So we really come to understand what are the concerns that beset modern day Iran, while also sort of seeing this young girl grow up in such a space. Now let's start with the title itself. The title itself is so fascinating, Persepolis. Now the title Persepolis actually refers to a ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, of the then Persian Empire, around the time when Persia had the largest empire in the known world. And so it's a particularly prominent place. It's even currently a prominent cultural heritage site in Iran as well as a UNESCO site. So the fact that she chooses to call the film Persepolis as well as her graphic novel Persepolis really talks about the fact that she is highlighting this larger, older, glorious history that Iran also has, all right, versus how people currently view Iran. So those are the kind of, those contrasts are what she's trying to sort of highlight in her film. Now the film comes to us in black and white in this really interesting animated style. We're also in that sense given color sequences. So the obvious thing that we see when we look at the color and black and white sequences is that she's probably using it to convey time, because all the color sequences come to us as a present narrative and the black and white sequences come to us as a flashback narrative. So that's a pretty easy way for us to sort of make that distinction. But at the same time, we also sort of realize that maybe there's a little more to the narrative than something as simplistic as just that. Because while she is detailing how she grew up in Iran and the experiences that changed her, as well as the experiences that changed Iran itself, she's equally talking about how else one must look at Iran. Right? Because there's a lot of bias, there's a lot of prejudice associated with how people view Iran, and so she's trying to combat that kind of narrative. So when it comes to us in black and white, what really happens is that we are then, it has sort of been neutralized of color, it has been neutralized of space. There are no obvious demarcations except for occasionally when she uses some kind of symbolism in the backdrop. It's all been sort of removed of all of that, which means this is a narrative that could exist in any part of the world and not just to Iran, right? And in fact, you can understand that this is a burning concern because even in the film, there's actually this really interesting sequence where, so it comes twice where we're really told about, how people look at Iran. So for instance, in the opening sequence itself, she's in an airport. And then she goes to the airport bathroom. She puts on the hijab. And as she's wearing the hijab, we see this white woman who's touching up her makeup and she's kind of giving her the side eye. And it's clearly coming from a bias, from this assumption that, oh, you are somebody who comes from a very restricted space, unlike me, who's so liberated. And we're specifically shown how she's wearing a sleeveless dress with slits, so sort of highlighting that one's modernity has to do with one's attire as opposed to one's thought process. Similarly, later on, when this comes in a later section where she's living and growing up in Vienna, and let me just find that. Yeah, so she's having this conversation with somebody who's trying to chat her up. This comes in the Vienna 1986 section, and we're already told that she feels a lot of, disarray. She feels guilty at the fact that she's here safe in Vienna while her family is all the way in Iran, and they're probably struggling and suffering. So when she's chatted up by this person and he asks her where she's from, she says she's French, and she doesn't really say anything more than that, and she cuts the conversation, goes away. And so we have the sequence of her walking down an alley on the street, and there's a shadow of her grandmother following her, and her grandmother says, like, oh, I didn't know you were French, like, since when did you become French? And so her thing is, do you think it's easy to be Iranian? People look at me as if I'm a savage. To them, we're just screaming fanatics fighting each other. But her grandmother's response is very clear. Is that a reason to disown your origins? Right? And so we know that she is also trying to combat that kind of perspective that people have about Iran, because they're sort of judging Iran by modern constructs, which is understandable, but also sort of seeing it from this perspective of how the West has sort of constructed an Eastern country, right? And how there are so many more facets to Iran than what is prominently sort of told to people. So by using black and white, she's sort of negating color, and she's negating prejudice, and sort of placing it in this kind of neutral narrative where anything could happen to anybody. That's kind of the idea that she's trying to really get at. So the use of black and white and the use of color both function as time as well as a way to sort of neutralize the narrative, and to sort of let us delve into the story without having to be concerned by any of these prejudices. So we're also, by the way, and I think we're made aware of it from the fact that this is a memoir, autobiographical memoir that has now been converted into a film. We get that sense of nostalgia in the narrative, and it comes to us quite often. One, the fact that the title itself refers to an earlier Iran, then the fact that it's in black and white, and there are these constant references to the past. There's also this idea that we're seeing her memories, because the film comes to us in a very episodic quality. And that episodic quality is important because we're constantly seeing this one significant incident, then another significant incident. And so it goes in this very episodic style, while also interestingly using cinematic techniques like chiaroscuro, this play of light and dark, to again sort of emphasize what the storytelling wants to sort of convey for us. So it's a really interesting use of traditional techniques of cinema, traditional techniques of animation, also fusing different styles of animation. So for instance, in the title credits, there's a lot of chalk art that's used. And chalk art is traditionally like something children like to do, something that's associated with like your classroom. And all of the images that we see in the title credits are images of Iran, traditional images that feature in folk art, as well as jasmines, which is, by the way, a recurring motif throughout the film, because there is the character Nilufer, who is associated with jasmine. There is the grandmother, who's associated with jasmine. So the jasmine becomes again a continuing motif of emotion, of feeling, also of the strength of the Iranian womanhood, because this is equally a narrative about gender concerns in Iran, right? Because the story is coming to us from a young girl's perspective, and what does it mean to grow up as a girl in Iran, right? So that is also something that comes through to us within the text. Now, we are given a very intimate narrative, which is why a lot of it sort of delves very clearly into her own personal experiences about her family, experiences about her body, experiences about her relationships, and also a very intimate understanding of what does it mean to be in Iran during a time of so many political changes. So it's all of those things that sort of come together for us, which is why we are constantly delving in and out of memories. So that sense of nostalgia is being sort of represented for us in different aspects. By the way, the switching of animation styles happens even in different sequences. For instance, every time there's a narration of the political spaces, like for instance, how did the Shah actually come to power, how the war really played out, how the regime sort of tries to control people. All of that is you showing shadow art or puppet theater, which is really interesting because on one hand, you are being puppeteered by a regime. On the other hand, the regime is also being controlled by other powers that be that are puppeting them. And that's sort of also being told to us through the entire film. So the film for us is, coming to us in major episodes as well as episodes within. So we have Tehran 1978, we have Tehran 1982, we then have Vienna 1986, Tehran 1992, and then exactly 1 year later, and then the narrative sort of closes. Now, in all of these episodes, these major episodes as well as the internal episodes, we are shown real life concerns, we're shown ordinary concerns, we're also shown the war. So all of this is sort of jostling for attention in this time. So, for instance, you have the film opening with a party, right? And the party sequence has people enjoying themselves, but also people discussing politics. And that's important because even in these moments, you are constantly aware of all of these changes that are happening around you. People are fighting to overthrow the Shah's regime, but they're equally aware of the dangers of doing that. And so this is constantly happening. Even at different sequences where we're shown sequences of war, but we're also shown very adolescent concerns constantly. We're shown, for instance, when she's in Vienna, we're shown how she is miserable being away from her family, but we're also shown what does it mean to go through puberty. So we're constantly given all of these things because there is a tendency to assume that if it's a conflict zone, you are just constantly in a state of conflict. That's actually unrealistic. You will have great moments of conflict, you will have the fear that the conflict is going to resume, but you will also have normal life. And we have number of such memoirs. So for instance, you have Bashar Pir's Curfewed Night, which shows you the violence of living in Kashmir with this looming sense of crisis all over you, but also very everyday student concerns, very everyday concerns of oh, I want to watch a movie, or oh, I want to go there. You have those very everyday concerns that are also sort of being framed by these experiences. So we have all of this sort of fighting for a space within this, because again, it's like a reminder that even in conflict zones, you have very ordinary concerns too, because Zena Biroched in I Remember Beirut talks about how food was accessed. Similarly, here she talks about how you didn't have most of the things available in supermarkets, and which is why when she first goes to Europe, her favorite place was going to the supermarket because everything was available. And so that contrast is constantly reminding us of how very small things get affected, and also some very small things that don't change. Like, you've just had a bombing, but the very next scene is of young girls walking and making eyes at other young boys. And so there is all of this happening while all of this fear also exists. And that's the idea, because that's the reality of living in a conflict zone. Now, what's interesting is the airport is a very central metaphor or motif that continues for us in the film. The film opens with the present, where she's in an airport, where she looks at Tehran on the board, and she's just kind of like, oh. And then she is wondering whether she should, go ahead, process her ticket, fly out, or what. And so she's just sort of waiting, and that's when the voiceover starts, and then we blend into the past, which goes back in black and white. And again, we're in an airport, but this time in Tehran, where she's a young girl, and they have a family member that has returned to them. And so we see these spaces constantly. In fact, airports occur very often. When she leaves Tehran for Vienna, when she returns from Vienna to Tehran, when she leaves again. And so it's a space of transition. It's a space of change. It's also this kind of space of goodbyes. and possible hellos, but there's no guarantee. There's a sense of anxiety associated with the airport, there's a sense of desolation associated with the airport, all of which also comes through for us. Now, we are, for instance, shown how she is as a young child. We're shown, for instance, how she responds to the politics around her. She doesn't completely understand it. She's, taken in by her parents' excitement, but at the same time, she also sort of voices things like when she says, as for myself, I think I love the Shah. He's been chosen by God. Yes, absolutely. God himself told me, and the teacher too. So we're told in that one statement that there is a lot of propaganda within the school spaces. There's also the fact that, it's easy to sort of indoctrinate children into such ideas. And so then the parents are like, we need to correct this. And we need to sort of change her perspective, because we see that even someone that young is affected by the politics of the space they live in. Like, for instance, when she declares that she, as a prophetess, will have certain, ideas by which the rest of the world must sort of comply, one of which is that old ladies will not suffer. And so when her grandmother is like, how do you know that old ladies won't suffer? She's like, simple, it'll be forbidden. Because in her country, in her society, that's normal. The regime says that this is the law, you will follow it or the punishment will be severe. Even later on, when she and her friends have started to sort of realize that, political prisoners are being released, and there are people who are torturing people, but instead of responding to it differently, their idea is like, let's also torture people who do such things. This one's father tortures people, let's torture him. That's a kind of attitude that you start to sort of ingrain, and you're not questioning it because that's part of your everyday space. And it's only because her parents are constantly reminding her that, hey, this is not correct, that she has an alternate perspective. And so we're also told that that's a privilege that she has that maybe a lot of others do not have access to. So even though, she says, I believe in the Shah, her father's like, no, I need to correct this perspective. And that's when we go into the first puppet show, which is, and you see like how the transition is really interesting, because the father is trying to tell the story and it's like they both split. It's like a curtain parts, and then the narration starts with, with this whole shadow puppet theater kind of narrative, and then the curtain again closes, and then she returns to the present. But you're told how everything pans out. And that's a very interesting thing, because in all of this, like, she does sort of glean something of it, but she's also sort of excited by, like, ooh, these are the kind of things that are happening. She hasn't completely got it, but she has sort of got certain aspects of it. And in fact, the older she gets, the more clearly she sort of understands these things. Like, for instance, over here, when her father narrates how the Shah came into power, he also tells her that the English had a role to play, and how they were like, you know what, become an emperor. Why would you be a president? It's better to be an emperor, just you give us the oil and we'll take care of the rest. And similarly, when she returns from Vienna, her father says that, but the West sold weapons to Iran and Iraq, and we fought with ourselves. They made money. We're dying, but it doesn't affect the rest of the world, because they have made money out of it, and we've sort of come out as fools in this entire experience. And so you're sort of shown how there are political agendas that are also sort of playing out in all of these narratives, and people are sort of getting taken for granted or taken for a ride in this entire sequence. And those are certain things that sort of come more stronger into her narrative. Even though even in that later sequence, again, it's like a puppet show, it just gets darker and darker. At least here there is still the mildness associated with, hey, this is a narration for a child, versus that where it's not narration for a child any longer. And that's something we're being told. So what's, by the way, interesting about that entire first sequence of the English telling the Shah to become the emperor is that the setting seems very Iranian, but also interestingly is reminiscent of the whole Garden of Eden sequence. Only thing, the serpent emerges from a jar, and the serpent here is the English, who emerges from a jar like a genie, and it's like, hey, take the crown, just give us the oil, and we'll handle everything. So it's that kind of a narrative. So it's like this constant blending between motives from different cultures, because it is a narrative about Iran, but it's also a narrative meant for people both within Iran as well as outside Iran to understand Iran. So there are these slight, subtle kind of references that she constantly brings in, which is really interesting. In fact, for instance, when we have the Shah talking on camera on the television, telling that, oh, I'm going to definitely bring democracy into Iran. The next sequence we have is of the people pulling down the statue of the Shah. And the way the statue is pulled down is very reminiscent of what happened during the Russian Revolution. And similarly, the very next sequence is of people storming the prison, which looks like the Bastille prison storming, which is French Revolution. So she's also sort of tying up this experience of the Iranian Revolution with two very prominent Western revolutions that changed those societies as well as other societies that were influenced by them. Because as far as Iran was concerned, this was important. It's just that they went into a theocratic regime that became just as harsh, if not harsher, than the Shah's regime, and so things sort of fell apart. But technically, as far as the people of Iran were concerned, they were hoping to effect something similar to that. But technically, if you think about it, whether you look at the French or the Russian Revolution, the revolution went with certain ideals. What happened following that is entirely different. There was violence, repressive regimes came into power. So those things also happened. And so it's equally a reflection of that. It's just that no one's going to look at a Western country's revolution and be like, oh, it failed in this fashion, or, oh, these things happen. More the moment when it comes to a West Asian country, it's like, oh, look at them, they just regressed, and so we're kind of given that perspective of how people sort of change their opinions about spaces based on just where they come from, which part of the world they come from. Is it global north or is it global south? And that's something that really is represented for us in this film as well. Now, an important character that we're introduced to in the first major segment of Tehran 1978 is Uncle Anush. And Uncle Anush is her uncle who was in prison. He's a very idealistic gentleman and he dies. And it's a really heartbreaking sequence. And it's a very important incident for her because it recurs right through. And it becomes like that one thing that sort of formulates her perspective on life. So it's a really important kind of experience for us. He even gives her a swan made of breadcrumbs, a bigger one and a smaller one. One is the uncle, one is the niece. It's really beautiful. It's very sad kind of an experience, but a very formative experience for her because Uncle Anush's story is a story that tells us about what idealism meant for them and what were they really fighting for Iran. And interestingly, his flashback sequences are completely in the folk art style of Iran. It's the kind that you sort of see in Iranian folktale books, and it's a very traditional kind of an artwork. It's beautifully done with a lot of intricate work, sort of representing this ideal Iran that they were sort of hoping for, which sort of falls apart in this very terrible fashion. But he also tells her something very important, because he tells her it's important that the memory of the family must not be forgotten. Even if it's hard, even if you don't understand everything, you must remember. And that is central to the narrative, because she immediately promises, saying, don't worry, Uncle Anush, I'll never forget. And that's central to why the memoir even exists, because she refuses to forget Iran. She refuses to forget the struggles. She refuses to forget why they got into this position in the first place. She intends to honor those memories, right? And that is really at the heart of it all. Because even, say, for instance, when she goes to Vienna and then she's sort of struggling to, assimilate into that space, and she constantly feels like an outsider. In fact, she mentions, I was trying to convince myself that I had found my place, but I remained different. And she finds it really hard to adjust, to sort of connect with people. She's constantly trying to be somebody she doesn't. She's trying to learn and read about the West, but she feels like an outsider. And so finally, when her friends, in the Vienna 1986 section, tell things like, oh, all of this is irrelevant, life is irrelevant, blah blah blah, and she's like, enough with your nihilistic nonsense, all right? I have lost family, life is relevant. And so she's really angry because it suddenly hits her that, what, how long is she going to hide who she is as a person just because she needs to sort of have friends or have people around her. But loneliness is a major theme of this narrative, because especially when she leaves and goes to Europe, it's like this constant reminder of being isolated. She's lost family. She's far away from them. She's constantly being reminded of that loss. And now she's sort of growing up in a space far away, constantly trying to sort of hide her identity, hold on to her identity. It's a lot of back and forth, push and pull that's really taking a toll on her. And so she's worried if she can actually believe what her family wants her to believe, if she can actually hold on to the advice of her family. Like before she left, for instance, her grandmother says a lot of very interesting things, where she says, in your life you'll meet a lot of assholes. Remember that it's stupidity that pushes them to be evil. It will prevent you from answering to their nastiness, because there's nothing worse than bitterness and vengeance. Always remain worthy and true to yourself. And that's exactly her father's advice as well. Never forget who you are and where you come from. But trying to sort of live in a faraway place, trying to sort of adjust there, trying to become part of them, she is constantly forgetting who she is. And which is why when her romance collapses, I mean, it's easy that she blames it on the romance, but it actually comes from a lot of guilt, fear, sense of loneliness, anxiety that really pushes her over the edge and makes her sort of cut away from her family, where she lives destitute on the streets like a vagrant. And there are a lot of darkness in that entire sequence, because she's malnourished, she's bumming other people's cigarettes, she's not eating well, she's scavenging for food in garbage bins, and there's also a possible, like an implied idea that maybe she was assaulted or raped. There's not much said, but it's sort of implied in how the narrative comes to us. And then she sort of collapses after spitting up blood. And so the voiceover is very interesting. It says, I'd lost some of my relatives in a revolution, I'd survived a war, and it's a love story that almost got me. But actually, it's that searching for a space that you can belong and not being able to find it, and that dissonance that is really causing that deep sense of despair within her, which sets her over the hill. Which is why even when she returns to Tehran and she goes for therapy, which she mocks, by the way, she talks about how it is finally, a desire to live once more that sort of pushes her out of it, pulls her out of that entire experience, because she hates herself. She hates who she's become. Which is why when she returns to Iran, she's actually so subdued. When the Guardians of the Revolution, like, put your veil back properly, and she's like, she does it. She doesn't question it, because she's lost so much. She doesn't know how to sort of stand up for herself anymore. But it's fighting to come back slowly, and that true coming of age that we really see, because every coming of age, or bildungsroman as we call it, is always about the character experiencing and growing from their experiences. Experiencing good, bad, ugly things, and then growing from those experiences. So when she first returns, she's submissive. When she gets her will back to survive, she sort of pushes herself, but she's still like, kind of like on the edge on what she should do. Even, for instance, when she dresses up and then, to avoid getting into trouble, gets somebody else into trouble, which her grandmother gets very angry about and says that you had a choice, you shouldn't have behaved like this. Do you not remember your family? Do you not remember your grandfather, your uncle? How could you do something like this? To then finally, getting that strength to like sort of voice it out. Like, for instance, when the Guardians of the Revolution stop her from running because they say, when you run, your behind makes indecent moves. She's like, then don't look at my ass. It's a perfectly valid thing, but it's like she's able to finally speak up for herself. So when the morality committee has like this whole meeting and they're like, you have to behave like this, you must dress like this, and she's like, why is it that as a woman I'm not allowed to feel anything while watching them, the men, while men can get excited on our shorter cows? And it's interesting because you have a lot of the men judging her, a lot of the men being like, not bad. And there are also women being like, how dare you? Because patriarchy doesn't only work with men, it also has many women supporting it. So it's like she's slowly able to speak up again. So you can see that she's growing from those experiences because she's had a great deal of darkness. Actually, being sent away to Europe was probably an experience of great abandonment. But we know where it comes from because her mother, when she tells her to go, her fear is very clear because they had a close friend, Niloufar, who dies. And the mother is like, do you know what happened to Niloufar? The law forbids to kill a virgin. She was forced to marry a guard. Then he took her virginity before executing her. And that's a kind of violence, which is why I said gender is also a really huge part of this narrative because gender is central to a lot of the concerns that play out in the film. And that's something that really comes through for us over here as well because every single time gender is sort of rearing its head, it comes up in how she's expected to behave versus men. Even her marriage for that matter, it's only because she's not permitted to sort of date publicly that finally marriage becomes a way to have choice, but it also kills your choice because she didn't want that. And her mother's heartbroken when she gets married because she's like, I always wanted you to be independent, educated and cultured, and now you're getting married at 21 years old. I want you to leave Iran to be free and liberated. And you sort of see that that's what she wants for her daughter, and then she's settling because she's constantly settling because your society is stopping you from having access to resources. And so the film is equally about what does a woman need in a society? What kind of access should she be given to sort of freely express herself? And we see art constantly featuring. So we see, for instance, a censorship in art that we see in her classrooms where there an anatomy class is basically a woman covered up, so there's no anatomy to sort of really study. Or if you're seeing Botticelli, it's Botticelli that has sort of been again covered up because there's nothing to sort of see because everything's seen as wrong, inappropriate. And interestingly, all the graffiti in the film, which is fascinating because I think one of the earliest graffitis comes in the Tehran 1982 section, where there's this graffiti of the Liberty statue with a skull head on the USA map, again sort of talking about the West as being problematic over here. Then there's also later graffiti which comes in in the after, just before the Tehran 1992 section, there's a graffiti of the Pieta. Only here it is a woman covered in a hijab with the abaya holding her dead son, because that's the sorrow of every parent who has had to send their children out to war. And why are they being sent to war? Because you're constantly being given this propaganda of, oh, die for your country, the flowers that bloom from the blood of our martyrs, or the fact that, oh, take this plastic key because if you die with this plastic key you will go to heaven where you will have women. Again, gender. It's like there's this constant idea like your desires will be fulfilled if you do what's right for the country. So it's constantly coming up in the entire narrative. So it's really fascinating how the whole thing is sort of framed for us, because we are seeing this up and down moment of life, but we're also seeing that some of the downs are real downs because they are war related downs, and some of it is coming because there is a very repressive framework that is sort of come into place, and much of it is felt on the female body because it is the women who become indistinguishable every time. For instance, even right after the regime takes over, there is a sequence of all of these girls in hijab, but then she makes the black blend into the background, so all you can see is these faces, right? They're just in this, they're just sort of being sort of consumed by this darkness. And again, not to sort of say that there's anything wrong with wearing the hijab, but it's about saying that for her it's not a choice, it's something imposed, and which is why she has a problem with it, as opposed to say Mrs. Nazreen, who wears it because that's something she identifies with. But for someone like Marjane, she doesn't identify with it. Or her grandmother, she doesn't identify with it. Because in fact, her grandmother's like, take it off, it makes me claustrophobic. So that's her grandmother's reaction, that's her family's reaction. Versus many other people who probably feel, no, this is something I identify with. So it is definitely important. Similarly, for instance, the girls are nearly indistinguishable because they are covered up, but the men, there's a lot of variety in how they're represented. But similarly, the other set of men that are completely indistinguishable is the men who are represented as the guardians of the revolution, or like the figures or the faces of the fundamentalist attitude. They're drawn nearly similarly to say that after a point they are indistinguishable, and they all like sort of walk around with prayer beads, but they mouth such violent, disturbing things. Like, for instance, when they're in the supermarket, and this man tells her mother to sort of, put your veil back on, and she's like, don't talk to me like that. And he's like, women like you, I fuck them against the wall. It's like really harsh. But you can see there's a sequence where the camera sort of focuses on the fact that he's holding prayer beads, and you're like, how can you have that and then voice this? Or for instance, when her aunt goes to get permission from the hospital administrator, who happens to be the old window cleaner, because now he's grown his beard, and he's like, he's become an administrator because he's agreeing to the regime. He has power to refuse somebody access to medical equipment or treatment. It's really terrible, because we're also seeing corruption, right? Corruption that is emerging from this sense of from a belief space, and that's really sad, because you are then presenting this very restrictive kind of a narrative for the female body, all right, and it's all emerging from how you can sort of represent yourself as following the regime and sort of getting power, because the window cleaner is constantly like, yeah, if God wants it, if God wants it, if God wants it. It's like, it's so convenient, because he's clearly getting back at her because he used to work for her, but now it's just like, oh, but I have this power, so I'm gonna do what I want to, and that's fine. Like, it's completely up to me. So there are great deal of violence that's shown to us, there's a lot of beauty that's shown to us, and there's a lot of heartbreak that's shown to us. But in all of this, we sort of realize that there's a character emerging that's completely resilient, that's growing from all of these experiences, and somebody who's actually learning, what it means to be a woman in modern day Iran. And which is why, when she contemplates divorce, and her friend is like, oh, her friend gives her the gender perspective, like, oh, if you get a divorce, all the men will look at you in a certain way. But her grandmother's like, nobody died, it's just a divorce, get it. It may be hard for you to deal with your mistakes, but move on from it. And so when she loses her friend, she's like, yeah, I mean, death is worse. Like, why do I care about divorce or how people will look at me? It doesn't matter. I need to stand up for myself. And which is why the last word of the film is Iran, because that's what matters most. Like, this is my identity, I'm going to speak about it, I'm going to be proud of it, and I'm going to ensure that things sort of change from here on forth. Thank you.